Hi there, my name is Curtis Brooks. I am a transformational speaker, and my job is to help professional men and women transform their lives through transforming their mindset. Again, through my transformational speaking, training, and coaching. So again, here on today, we do a Facebook Live event, more or less the concept into application, if you will. Again, concept into application here on each Thursday at 10 a.m. So hence, if you look at check out our website or check out our professional profile here on Facebook, you'll see that in the past weeks we've been consistent with doing a Facebook Live event at 10 o'clock again at on Thursday, each week on Thursday. And we also do a Facebook Live event on Tuesday at 11:30. So just wanted to make you aware of that. My website for more information about what I do as a transformational speaker, how you can get in contact with me, either through the Facebook Live event here or somewhere there's information on my Facebook profile there. Also on the website as well. That's I am Curtis Brooks. Again, that's IAMCurtisBrooks.com. Now today we're going to be talking about Be Mediocre No More. What's it about? Mediocre is interesting, but before we get into that, I always like to start with the definition of the word, just so that we're on the same page, because in most cases, what separates us is really the semantics, and sometimes we're saying the same thing, but in a sense, as the word mediocre means, let's just read the definition and make sure that we're on the same page, and so we're not causing stumbling blocks. So the word mediocre means of only ordinary or moderate quality, neither good nor bad, barely adequate. A sentence: the car gets only mediocre mileage, but it's fun to drive. Very interesting. Second definition: not satisfactory, poor, inferior, mediocre construction, makes that building look dangerous. So again, there's a sentence: mediocre construction makes that building look dangerous. And it's interesting how many of us have accepted mediocre. And by the way, that definition comes from dictionary.com. But again, it's interesting how many of us accept the definition mediocre and why it runs so rampant in most of our lives. I'm going to venture to say, as a transformational speaker, I'm going to venture to say that mediocre is not necessarily the place that we start from. Because as a young kid or young person, we've all been there, where that when we were young, we had these hopes and dreams and ideas. We're going to take over the world. We're going to change this. We're going to change that. But all of a sudden, things had changed. The list went from this to this. And we step in the realm of being mediocre. So today we're talking about be mediocre no more. And I'm going to venture to say that being mediocre, again, it's not something that we choose. But through disappointments, life's disappointments that take place in all of our lives, it's really not knowing how to file those things, if you will. Because even out of the disappointments, we can grow, we can change, we can turn the grapes into wine, if you will, out of disappointments. Turn the lemons into lemonade. Something that's valuable, something that works for us. And it's important to know that mediocre is not a resting place, but it can become a resting place because of disappointments. So more so than just being mediocre, it's being mediocre no more. So it's really stepping beyond what's mediocre. It's getting beyond the disappointments in all of our lives. Disappointment it's a way of life. It's a fact of life. Sometimes we are misunderstood. And I'm going to write that and challenge us to, again, get deeper, understand more, that misunderstanding is sometimes having to do with being mediocre. We're misunderstood. Disappointment. Disappointment is huge. Disappointment is, it's really not only, well, misunderstanding, being misunderstood and disappointment is, they're both big. They're both huge. And the challenge sometimes, again, is getting over this. Getting over being misunderstood and understanding that it's a fact of life. It's hard to accept the disappointments. But I think sometimes when we put it in a different perspective and understand that we ourselves have disappointed people. We have misunderstood others, and we've been misunderstood. And so being mediocre is really not a resting place. It's a place that we make by choice because of the disappointment or being misunderstood. It's ultimately about a decision. Not being mediocre, not that alone, but choosing to say no more. I will not be mediocre anymore. I will go for it. I will not just take a joyride for the sake of taking a joyride. Hence, our definition. The car was slow, but it was fun. And how many of us are standing in that position where mediocre is just getting by? Mediocre is just, as the definition says, adequate. It just is. It's barely enough. It's low quality. And if we could just go back for a moment in time and think about that child, that inner child that was hungry, that wanted different things, and how life dealt us one too many blows. And now it's up to us to shake it off. It's up to us to dust ourselves off and stand up and be the person that we want to be, that we choose to be. And I'm going to venture to say that most of us don't choose to be mediocre. But I will also say that, or make a point that due to being disappointed, the disappointment, being misunderstood, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, because being mediocre still remains a choice. The no more part is also a choice. It's up to us to decide what's going to work for us. And too often, the disappointments have been working for us. And I'm being facetious when I say that, because in truth, they're not working. It's easy to settle here, folks. This part right here is easy to settle. And I say that loosely because it's really a painful place to settle. Because you've had the inner child working, that's hungry for certain things, that's starving, that wants to change the world, that wants to make a commitment to A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on and so forth. So you had that inner child when we were young, wanting to make those things happen, wanting to make those goals, wanting to challenge ourselves, and wanting to challenge others. But all of a sudden, life deals us disappointments through financial disappointments, through personal disappointments, things that we're dealing with. And also the misunderstanding, being misunderstood. Those things will deal a deathly blow to all of us. Where we say one thing, it possibly comes out the other way, or comes out in the wrong way. Well, I didn't mean to say that. And this could sometimes be at the cost of our career being misunderstood. Perhaps writing an article, a blog post, and you mean one thing, but yet your readers take it for something else. And so it really essentially is a fine line. But yet, it's a choice that we make, is to be mediocre. Again, being misunderstood, being disappointed. Those are the biggest challenges that we face as to falling into being mediocre. But on today, you have the option to change your mind to say no more. On today, you have the option to say, you know what? I'm going to pick myself up. I'm going to dust myself off. I'm going to turn those lemons into lemonade. I'm going to turn those opportunities where I've been misunderstood, where I've been disappointed. I'm going to turn those things around and stand up and take a stand for what I believe. Because ultimately, be it disappointment or misunderstood, being misunderstood, it has to do with what we believe. We hope for something, it did not happen in a way that we expected it. We believed in something, it did not turn out the way that we wanted it to turn out to. We became disappointed. And we settled into being mediocre. But on today, you don't have to settle for being mediocre. You don't have to settle for less. You don't have to settle for what's adequate. You don't have to. But you do. You will have to make a decision to say no more. You will have to make a decision to say, you know what? I'm going to take those disappointments and I'm going to turn them around. I'm going to look deeper within myself and say, why was I disappointed? So I can come out of this place of being mediocre and say no more. I'm making a decision to say no more. I'm going to look deeper into why was I misunderstood. Is it something that I'm believing in? Is it some way that I'm looking at something, perhaps in a different perspective? Those will definitely cause us to be mediocre because of the very fact that when we're misunderstood, it sometimes feels that we're shoved off into an island by ourselves, if you will, or shoved off into a corner, being pushed back into the corner, and ultimately feeling like we're by ourselves. And even to add to the disappointments, being disappointed. It's like a man being on an island by himself, or it feels that way at times. But I want to challenge you to go beyond your feelings and search why you feel the way that you feel. Ask yourself, why was I misunderstood? And sure, it can be a host of different reasons why we're misunderstood. It can be a host of different reasons why we're disappointed. But the main thing for being disappointed is we expected something. It's our list or the one thing that we're expecting. We could be expecting a lot of different things. We can have a list a mile long. But ultimately, it comes down to an expectation not being met. Sometimes we are expecting too much from people. Sometimes we're giving so much that we're expecting the other party or parties to reciprocate what's been given to them. So disappointment comes in. And somehow we find ourselves being withdrawn. Sometimes we find ourselves, again, feeling like we're on an island by ourselves, being backed up into that corner, and then we come into a place of being mediocre because we feel that we've given too much and we were not appreciated. And that in itself is just another word for us to ponder, for us to think about. Because in a lot of ways, being unappreciated is being pushed back into that corner or feeling like we're on an island and that really no one cares. And in fact, until we come out of disappointment and ask our own selves, ask yourself of the question, why am I disappointed? Why was I misunderstood? And until we can answer these questions satisfactorily, then we can come out of being mediocre and understand that it's not about them. It's not about them. It's what we're thinking. It's what our expectations are. It's what we are thinking. And ultimately, we speak and we do. These are the reasons why we are misunderstood. Because ultimately, it's what we have expected. It's what we are thinking. And ultimately, we act on what we think. And when we act on what we think, guess what happens? We are, again, misunderstood when it doesn't necessarily fit into the plans of others, or it doesn't necessarily fit into what the masses are thinking. We're misunderstood. And again, we're drawn, or at least feeling like we're inadequate. And we're pushed back or withdraw to that corner, if you will, only to feel that we are mediocre. But you don't have to be mediocre. My friends, this is not an easy task because it requires work. It requires us individually asking ourselves those important questions. Why am I disappointed? What was I expecting? It's almost kind of like looking at our lives like a story, if you will. We need to answer the how, what, where, when, and why of our own lives. How did it happen? How did I come to the place that I'm at right now? When did it happen? What was going on in here? Why was I disappointed? And all these questions are relevant. And they are definitely important because when we can answer those questions, the how, what, when, where, and why, we can answer the question of being disappointed, and being ultimately misunderstood, and why we are being mediocre, why adequate is satisfactory for us. It doesn't have to be satisfactory for us, but again, it takes us doing the work. Many people are saying that, hey, we've got 5 steps to this, 6 steps to this, and only 3 steps to this, and you can lose all the weight, and you can come into a wonderful place, and you can be wealthy, you can do this, and you can do that. But the reality of it is that you've heard me say multiple times that if you plant apple seeds on today, my friend, you will not have an apple tree tomorrow, Saturday, or at least a week from now. It's going to take time. And many of us are wanting it now. And even if there are 6 steps, we've got to ultimately do the work. We still have to ask the questions. Why am I disappointed? Why was I misunderstood? And when you can answer, and when we can answer these questions, we can get to why things are mediocre and come out of the mediocrity and say no more. And go on to achieve that lifelong goal, whatever it may be. But we have to answer the tough questions, and many times most of us don't want to do the tough work because it takes time. It takes slowing down to smell the roses, if you will. It takes slowing down to recognize that if I'm walking in a northbound direction, I'm going to seek certain things from the north. If from the left to the right. But now if I'm walking in a southwardly direction, I'm going to see something completely different. I'm going to see the other side of the homes clearly versus the other side coming from the north. So it's important that we have the right perspective. And sometimes you might have to do a couple of strolls up and down the street to gain the right information, to see things correctly. And it doesn't mean that we are falling into a mass ideology and let's all think together, or let's all think the same thing. No. What it means is that there's going to be a need for a different perspective. There's going to be a need for us to take a walk going in a northbound position or direction, and also in a southbound direction. There's going to be a need for us to look at disappointment more than just one way. More than just from our own perspective, that I didn't get what I needed. Sometimes we're giving things away. And again, not there's anything giving things away or giving of yourself and time. Absolutely. Not there's anything wrong with that. But our disappointment sometimes, or most times, it comes in a way of what we expected. And those expectations not being met. So, again, it becomes important to walk up the street in a northbound direction. And also walk back in a southbound direction. So that we are getting a different perspective on why we were disappointed. And see, the biggest challenge with being disappointed is that we don't see the other perspective. We don't see the other side. We only see that we were hurt. We only see that we were affected by it. We only see that we were misunderstood. And ultimately, it drives us to being mediocre. But you don't have to be mediocre anymore. You just have to do the work. Whether it's one step, one giant step, 2 mini steps, or 3 large steps. It's going to take work, folks. I can write down a list of different things that's going to satisfy your appetite or appeal to your senses intellectually. But it still takes work. And the challenge is that if I ask myself these questions, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how, if I begin to look at my own story in a sense of the antagonist and the protagonist, if you will, and eventually come into an end where there is an awesome ending or an awesome story where the prince meets his bride or the princess meets her groom or whatever the case might be. And our lives are like a story that in most cases it begins with the antagonist. There's the protagonist. There's a conclusion. And there's an opportunity for us to change and be more than just mediocre, but make a decision to say no more. Make a decision to say this story, my story, does not have to end the way that it's ending, or at least the way that it appears to end. You can make a decision to say no more. I'm going to ask myself the tough questions. I'm going to ask myself the why, the what, the when, the where, and the how. I'm going to write a different script, if you will. The disappointments in life probably will never change. They will never go away. And even as being misunderstood, they won't ever go away. It doesn't mean that these things are impossible. It means that they are reality. This is what we all deal with. Being misunderstood, disappointments, being unappreciated. But individually, me, you, we can change those things. Not how another person feels. We can't change that. But we can change how we feel. And when you can change how you feel, that means, guess what? You've done the work. You've asked the how, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And you've made up your mind to say, mediocre, no more. And this is the ultimate goal. Going beyond what's just adequate. Going beyond the joyride, if you will. Going back to the definition. Be mediocre, no more. Make up your mind today that, you know what? I want to change things. I get to make that decision for my life. And if I could just add a few more, just one more piece of this, is that most cases, a lot of the decisions that we're making, even in this day, even now, or last week, or 5 minutes from now, are based on what we learned as a child. Most of us aren't really changing our minds that much. We're not tweaking things that much. But it's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of walking up the street in a northbound direction and also walking back in a southbound direction and attaining or acquiring a different perspective. Because disappointment is one perspective. Being misunderstood is one perspective. And that perspective comes from me if I'm disappointed. That one perspective comes from you if you're disappointed. Again, we've got to do the work, folks. 6 ways to be successful. 5 ways to ruin it. It's because we didn't do the work. All of this requires work, and again, most of us aren't willing to do the work. And the word will is something to do with you taking action, for me to take action. So how many of you will join me in saying no more for being mediocre? I choose not to be mediocre anymore. I choose to answer the questions of myself. The how, the what, the when, the where, and the why. I choose to dig into this to get more out of myself. Because when you don't, or make a decision, when we make a decision and choose not to look into why we're disappointed, why am I misunderstood? Why am I misunderstood? When we make a decision not to look at those things, it ultimately becomes a cover-up. A cover-up for really just opening the lid, taking the lid off, being just adequate. You begin to uncover that, because that's eventually what we will all fall into. Questions take work. The questions aren't work, but asking ourselves of the question and finding out, or at least seeing what's happening, those ideas, those thoughts that are taking place on the inside, the changes that are going on, the change that will go on when you ask yourself the questions, the what, the where, the when, the how, and the why. There's change that takes place in our lives. And because of that change, we can come out of being mediocre. We don't have to be mediocre anymore. Because of the change, we are making a decision to say, disappointment doesn't satisfy me anymore. I don't want to live in that place anymore. I want to go beyond being just mediocre. This is all about a decision that you and I will have to make to say no more for being mediocre. The word mediocre is just adequate. It's just getting by. It's just doing enough. And again, in most cases, the mediocre, being mediocre, or is a decision, but it comes out of being disappointed. Disappointments. It comes out of being misunderstood. It comes out of being unappreciated. It comes out of a host of different things. And by no means is this an exhaustive list. Absolutely not. Because we've all been disappointed, and we all have our list of disappointments. But nevertheless, it still ends up the same thing. We end up at the same place. No matter what's on the list, no matter how the list was created, no matter why the list was created, when it was created, where it was created, the time and the date, none of that stuff matters. Because in the end, it spells out disappointment, it spells out being misunderstood, unappreciated, and a list of other things, and we end up being mediocre because of it. We end up being pushed back, or at least the feeling of being pushed back, that we withdraw from life and situations, from our goals, things that we are seeking to accomplish. We end up withdrawing from life, if you will, and falling into being mediocre. But here's the thing. You don't have to be mediocre anymore. You don't have to be. We have to do the work. We have to ask ourselves the questions. The what, the where, the when, the how, and the why. And that's the work that we're not doing. We're basing our lives on the 5 ways to be successful, the 6 ways to be successful. It doesn't matter how you slice it, dice it, or cut it. The point of it is that it takes work. There is no quick process to any of this. It takes work. And most of us are thinking the work is done on the outside. The work has to be done on the inside. Because ultimately, we produce what we believe, or what we feel, how we feel, we produce out of that. And if we're not feeling up to par, if you will, due to disappointment or being misunderstood, unappreciated, if we're not feeling any of those things, guess what? We become mediocre. Because of the disappointment, because of being misunderstood. We withdraw from life. We withdraw from those dreams, those ideas that we had as youth. Most of us as youth had an idea of, oh, I want to do this. When I get older, I want to do this. We have all those ideas and dreams, things that we want to accomplish. But then reality sets in, a certain reality sets in, and we become disappointed. And again, disappointment has to do with an expectation not being met. We expected something, and we didn't get it. Misunderstood is a thought process that the masses doesn't necessarily agree with. And when I say masses, I'm not meaning thousands of people. It could be your closest friend. Your best friend. It could be 5 people, 10 people. But again, being misunderstood will take us to being mediocre. Being disappointed will draw us to being mediocre. But we don't have to live there anymore. One of the interesting things about life sometimes is that when we were younger, there was a responsibility that our parents had to us. And just, they assumed the responsibility of parents because they'd given birth to us. But the challenge sometimes, a lot of times is for us, is that we now have to take responsibility for our own lives. Mom or dad may not be there anymore, or a guardian may not be there anymore. Someone who was responsible at one point in our lives. And especially when we were much younger, unable to take care of ourselves in a lot of ways. So there was responsibility that someone else was taking care of us. They put food on the table. We didn't have to worry about where the food was going to come from. That was their job. But now, it's our job. It's your job to make sure the food is on the table. So it becomes our responsibility. And again, still talking about disappointment. Because it's our responsibility, but when those responsibilities are not met, or we don't accomplish those responsibilities, we don't take care of those responsibilities, disappointment sets in. And we, again, go back to a place of being mediocre. And don't get me wrong, I know how difficult it is. I know how challenging it is. So I'm not going to blow smoke and say, hey, it's easy. No, absolutely not. Living life is probably the most difficult thing that any of us will do. And unfortunately, we can't pull to the side of the road and say, you know what, I'm going to take a break. This is my pit stop. And that sometimes will be a place of coming into being mediocre again. The pit stops of life. Those times where we feel like, you know what, it's too much. I need to just pull this vehicle over. I need to put a halt to everything, to things that I'm working on, to the friends, the close friends, the phone calls, not answer the phone. I need to just withdraw, if you will. Because there are certain responsibilities that I have, I'm not meeting those goals. There are expectations that I have, and I'm not accomplishing those things, or at least the other party is not reciprocating. I've given X, Y, Z, and the other party is not giving to what I'm expecting. And perhaps part of being mediocre is sometimes we don't share those expectations. Sometimes we don't let the other person know what the expectations are. And I would just say that perhaps it's like a contract. Maybe not so much in a written contract, but there are conversations that need to be said when we find ourselves expecting and those expectations not being met. And we find ourselves being drawn to being mediocre. And let me see what you got there, Tish. Absolutely, Tish. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, that's very very true, Tish. Yeah, we as adults we don't make ourselves very clear, and that's a very good point, Tish. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. We really don't. We don't make ourselves clear for whatever reason, and sometimes honestly, sometimes we have hidden agendas, and we're not making ourselves clear for a reason. And a lot of times it ends up biting us in the behind, if you will, because it ends up being, like you mentioned there in your notes there, it ends up being a misunderstanding. We're expecting one thing, but if we're not making ourselves clear, it absolutely ends up being a misunderstanding. And when it's a misunderstanding, guess what? We end up disappointed because we didn't get what we expected, or at least it was not returned in a way that we expected it. And so we withdraw sometimes in life and become mediocre and doing just enough. We say, well, you know what? I've given this much. I've given X, Y, Z for so long and so much of it that now I'm feeling unappreciated, I'm feeling misunderstood, and it sets in disappointment. And so, again, we withdraw, I said earlier, in a sense that we withdraw into a place almost like to the corner, if you will. Almost like a man on an island by himself, or at least feeling like we're by ourselves. But the reality of it is that disappointment is something that we need to get used to. And I'm not saying that it's okay. That's not what I'm saying. But the fact is that we cannot change people. People make up their own minds that they want to, if they want to change. They make up in their own minds that they say no more. I don't want to be mediocre anymore. So that's the reality, is that we cannot change people, but we can change how we see things. We can change how we think. So earlier I mentioned there are 5 things we need to answer. How, what, where, when, and why. And typically we say how, what, when, where, and why. We relate those 5 things to telling a story, writing a story, marketing. And essentially, that's what we have to answer within our own selves. The how, what, where, when, and why. And then we come to a place where I don't have to be disappointed anymore, because I know what to expect. And again, this is not something we're going to know all the time, but I'm prepared, if you will. I'm prepared now. There's nothing that you can really get over me, because I'm dealing with the disappointment. I'm also understanding that I disappointed others as well. And that's the biggest challenge sometimes, because we disappoint people sometimes. We don't follow through sometimes. And so sometimes in this disappointment or being misunderstood, and again, a host of bunch of other stuff out there, being unappreciated, a lot of times that's just what's happening, is that because of those things that are taking place, we sometimes just, again, we disappoint people ourselves, and we sometimes see it just as a one-way street. And as I said earlier, is that we're walking up the street in a northbound direction, but we also have to walk back the other way in a southbound direction to get the other perspective. Is that when we understand that we've disappointed people, we can now level the playing field and say, hey, you know what? I've disappointed people too. So I understand how it feels. It's a yucky feeling to have someone disappointed at me. It's a yucky feeling to disappoint others. But because I've answered the questions, the how, the what, the where, the when, and the why, guess what? I can come into a new consciousness that says, be mediocre, no more. And see, what many of us are not understanding is that this is human nature. This is human nature. And a new consciousness, again, will bring you out of this here. It doesn't mean that we won't ever be disappointed ever again. It doesn't mean that we won't ever be misunderstood. But what it does mean is that I accept my role as being a human being, and that at times I'm going to disappoint others. I'm going to be misunderstood as well. But because I understand that, I've done my homework. I've answered the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how. I can now rise above this. Rise above the mediocrity. Rise above the disappointment. Rise above the being misunderstood. These things don't have a place anymore. Because now I'm walking in a southbound direction now. I'm no longer walking in a one direction or that northbound direction. and seeing only one perspective. I'm now seeing different perspectives, answering the what, where, when, why, and the how. And again, rising above the misunderstandings, rising above the disappointments, rising above feeling unappreciated, rising above all of those things that will allow us to withdraw from life, withdraw from achieving those goals that we have, withdraw from wanting to do more. All of those things, when we settle here, when we make this our nesting place, our home, it's hard to. Also, when you set expectations on people and you don't tell them, you get disappointed. Absolutely. We all need to understand that everyone has a story, and once we know the path they walk, we can begin to understand more. Absolutely. So proud of you. Oh, thank you, Tish. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I thank you for your participation, Tish. You've been here for the last couple of weeks, last few weeks, I should say, and it is definitely a good feeling to have someone participate in this here and along your journey. So I absolutely appreciate what you're doing by being here, participating. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Absolutely. And so as you mentioned earlier, so if we're not making ourselves clear, guess what? We're setting ourselves up for disappointment. And, as you mentioned here, is that, we have to make things clear. We have to make sure the other person knows what path that we're walking. And that if they know the path that we're walking, now, guess what? You know the information, you have the information that's out there, and you can make a decision to walk with me or not. But rest assured, mediocre is not what I'm looking for. Being adequate is not what I want. I need people, you need people, we all need people to raise their level of consciousness. And at some point, I'm going to do a Facebook Live event on about consciousness. Going back to the Bible, when God says to Eve, "Who told you you were naked?" So it's about a consciousness. Who told you that you couldn't accomplish that? Who told you? And again, the what, the where, the when, the how, and the why. All of those 5 things are important. And unless we are prepared to answer those things, we'll be in a place of being mediocre. And that's what it's about. It's about going beyond being mediocre. It's saying mediocre no more. I choose to go beyond what's just adequate. I want to go beyond just what's enough. That's not what I want. Because the only way that you and I are going to, as one gentleman had said on a YouTube video that I had watched some years ago, the only way that we're going to make it to the food truck, and that's a whole lot of truth, is that you have to go beyond being mediocre. You have to say mediocre no more. That's the only way that we're going to make it to the food truck and assist others to make it to their food truck. Not talking about what they're serving, but to ensure that you're making it to the food truck, I'm making it to the food truck. Guess what? I need to help you, you need to help me, and we need to kind of just nudge each other along and say, hey, you know what? You're better than that, Tish. You're better than that. You're worth more than that. You don't have to be mediocre anymore. It's all about a decision that you and I must make to say, I'm not going to let the disappointment sneak in there anymore. I know that disappointments are a part of life. They're a fact of life. I know that times I will disappoint others. I know there's times where I will be misunderstood. I get that. But I will not allow those things to push me back into being mediocre. I want that same fervency that I had as a youth that said, you know what? I want to do this. Mom, I want to do this. Dad, I want to do this. I want to do this. And I want to do this. I want to do that. To the point where they say, oh, okay, slow down, Curtis, slow down, slow down. Slow down, Tish, slow down. And that's what we want. We want to come back into that consciousness, that new consciousness. And I won't even say that it's new. It's been there. But somehow we've lost a connection. We've disconnected and put more hope and trust into things rather than to people, rather into nudging each other along their journey and say, hey, you don't have to be mediocre anymore. So with that being said, Tish, if you got any questions or make any comments, or hey, please feel free to make those comments here. And I have been on since, well, almost an hour actually. Yeah, I started at 10 o'clock my time here in Fort Worth Central Time. So again, if you have any questions, Tish, or want to make any more comments, definitely please do so. I'll read them and get to them. And again, thank you for your comments, as you've already stated there. Appreciate it. Once more, my name is Curtis Brooks. I am a transformational speaker. My job is to help professional men and women create a winning mindset through my transformational speaking, training, and coaching. You can contact me here on my Facebook Live profile, or at least my Facebook profile. And each week we do two Facebook Live events. The Thursday event is the one today, was at 10 o'clock, or it starts at 10 o'clock Central Time. And our other Facebook Live event is on Tuesday at 11:30, and that's called Getting Answers. It is an entrepreneur show for professionals as well. And so, hey, check us out there again. Again, Facebook Live event on Tuesday at 11:30. It's called Getting Answers. It's a show that I'm doing. Just started. I did my second episode on 2 days ago. And let's see here. What else we got there? And again, this event here is also on Thursday at 10 a.m. So any more questions? If not, I am going to be signing out. And again, thank you very much, Tish, for your participation. Much appreciated. And hey, by the way, if you got Facebook Live events going on, Tish, I know that you do catering and things of that nature. So if you got any Facebook Live events, hey, let me know. Please send me a request, and I will be there, Johnny on the spot, to encourage you as well. So again, thank you, Tish. Much appreciated. And I hope that you have a great day, and that this information that I shared with you has been content worthy. It's going to help you, and it's just gonna hopefully clear some things up. So again, thank you, Tish. Much appreciated, and you have a great day. Bye-bye.